It was supposed to be a peaceful solo hike, just a weekend getaway for a young man seeking clarity and connection with nature. 24-year-old Josh Keller had always been drawn to the mountains, the crisp air, the whispering trees, and the way the world seemed to slow down the higher he climbed. Friends described him as adventurous, but grounded, cautious, yet curious. He wasn't the type to take wild risks. So when he set off on the Cascade Canyon Trail in Grand Teton National Park last spring, no one imagined that would be the last time anyone would see him. What began as a quiet escape soon unraveled into a mystery that would grip the entire region. Josh had texted his sister Emily just before his hike began. "No signal here. I'll check in Sunday night," he wrote. That message would become the last known communication from him. By Monday morning, when no one heard from him, concern quickly turned to panic. His car was found parked neatly near the trailhead. Inside were a half-empty bottle of water, a folded map of the Tetons, and a journal. It looked as though he'd intended to return, but out on the trails, there was no sign of him. Rangers scoured the rugged terrain for weeks. Volunteers and even drones joined the search, but the wilderness remained silent. Snowfall came early that year, burying any clues the mountain might have held. And just like that, Josh Keller became another missing hiker swallowed by the vast and unforgiving landscape of the Tetons. Months passed, seasons changed. And slowly, his story faded from headlines and search parties, but not for his family. Emily, his younger sister, never gave up. She kept reaching out to park officials, returned often to Wyoming, and even started a small online community to raise awareness of missing persons in national parks. It was her way of keeping his name alive and, perhaps, deep down, hoping for a miracle. Little did she know that an answer was coming, and it would arrive from the most unlikely place, high above the valley floor. Nestled in the sharp cliffs near Paintbrush Divide, it was late March when Ranger Ben Hartley was performing a routine climb, checking on known eagle nests in the area as part of a long-running conservation program. Hartley had worked the Tetons for over a decade. He knew the peaks and ridges like the back of his hand, and nothing surprised him anymore. Until that day, as he peered into a large, windswept nest perched precariously on a narrow rock ledge, he spotted something odd. Mixed in with feathers, bones, and bits of scavenged debris was a piece of faded fabric. At first, it looked like a torn jacket sleeve, worn thin by time and weather. But something about the color and the way it caught the light tugged at his memory. Curious. And with the help of climbing gear, Hartley carefully reached into the nest. What he pulled out next made his hands freeze. It was a small, weather-beaten backpack, the kind designed for day hikes. It was ripped along one side, partially crushed, and nearly camouflaged by the natural materials around it. Attached to the zipper was a keychain and old guitar pick encased in resin. Hartley recognized it. He had seen that exact detail in a missing persons file almost a year earlier. He didn't say a word at first. He just stared at the item, heart pounding, knowing this could be the break the Keller family had been waiting for. Back at the station, Hartley and a small team examined the contents of the backpack. What they found sent shivers down their spines. Inside was a water-stained notebook. Though the writing was smudged and partially illegible, parts of it could still be read. Josh's name was scribbled on the first page, along with dates that matched the week he went missing. There were several pages filled with reflections, fragments of thoughts about nature, solitude, and something else, something darker. One line stood out. "I think I'm being watched." Another, "This place feels different, not just wild something is off." It didn't make sense. No signs of foul play had ever been found. But the tone of his words, especially in the last few entries, hinted at a rising fear. A sense of being followed, maybe even hunted. But by what or who? The backpack, remarkably preserved in that harsh and remote location, had never been visible from below. No hiker would have spotted it. No drone flew that close to the cliffs due to strong winds and poor visibility. Only an eagle, perhaps mistaking it for scavenged material, had brought it up there. But how did it end up in such a place? And where was Josh? The discovery reignited interest in the case, and soon the Keller family returned to the Tetons. Emily stood at the ranger station, clutching her brother's journal with tears streaming down her face. "He was out there," she whispered. "He was alive, at least for a while." The National Park Service resumed the search in nearby areas using the new clues from the journal. More teams were dispatched to less accessible zones around the cliffs and hidden valleys. Everyone hoped that answers would finally emerge. But just when it seemed the trail was warming up again, another twist arrived, this one even more chilling. A few days after the backpack was recovered, a wildlife camera set high in the canyons picked up something strange. A brief flash of movement, just a shadow, really passing between trees near a cave opening rarely explored. The footage was grainy, but it didn't resemble any known animal. Park officials initially dismissed it as a trick of light or a large bird, but when a second camera, just days later, caught something similar at a different angle, questions began to resurface. Was Josh alone in those woods? Had he encountered someone or something lurking deep in the wilderness? The mystery grew heavier, not lighter. Some hikers reported hearing strange sounds near the divide, a low, echoing hum that seemed to follow them. Others mentioned stacked stones and odd symbols etched into tree bark patterns that didn't match any known animal activity or weathering. Rumors swirled online. Some claimed it was the work of a reclusive mountain hermit. Others whispered about ancient legends tied to the Tetons, stories long buried under snow and silence. But none of it explained how Josh's gear ended up inside an eagle's nest. Whatever happened to Josh Keller, one thing became clear: his disappearance wasn't just another lost hiker case. And the Tetons, they were holding on to secrets. As the investigation continues and new clues emerge, one question remains on everyone's mind. What did Josh see out there that made him write, "I think I'm being watched"? And if someone or something was watching, is it still there? Stay tuned. What comes next might just change the way we see the wild forever. In the days that followed the backpack discovery, the atmosphere around Grand Teton shifted. What had once been a stunning and peaceful escape for hikers and travelers now carried an undercurrent of unease. Tourists still came, drawn by the beauty of the jagged peaks and glacier-fed lakes, but local rangers and volunteers felt something different. It wasn't just the renewed interest in Josh Keller's case, was the sense that something was missing from the bigger picture. Something just beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. Ranger Ben Hartley found himself going back over the details again and again. He couldn't shake the feeling that Josh's journal had left breadcrumbs, clues that hadn't yet made sense. He remembered the specific phrasing. "I thought I heard wings, but nothing was there." Another note said, "A flash of white between trees. Too fast for a person." Josh had written those entries on his second and third days in the backcountry, somewhere near the upper canyon ridges. It didn't sound like a hallucination. The entries were too grounded, too detailed. Josh had described the cold, the lack of sleep, the way he kept getting the feeling he was being followed, even though no footprints ever appeared behind him. He'd chalked it up to paranoia, but the fear was there in his words. Emily, determined to retrace his steps, was given limited access to some of the journal's pages. She sat in silence at the ranger station, rereading her brother's handwriting. She knew him better than anyone. If Josh had been scared, genuinely scared, then it wasn't just the wilderness getting to him. He wasn't the type to panic easily. And she remembered something else he had once told her: he was fascinated by places that felt untouched by time. The Tetons were one of those places. He had wanted to find a specific viewpoint, something he called the Eagle's Spine, a narrow ridge that wasn't on the official map but was rumored to offer the most breathtaking view in the park. He'd read about it in an old climbing forum and had become obsessed with reaching it. Maybe that was where he went. Maybe that's why no one found him. With that detail in mind, the rangers began reviewing archived aerial maps and GPS data. From past hikers who had ventured off-trail, the Eagle's Spine Ridge did exist, though it was treacherous and only a handful of experienced climbers had documented it. No established trail led there. Just jagged rock faces, loose shale, and sheer drops. And strangely, those who had reached it rarely stayed long. A few blog posts described strange sounds like whispers carried on the wind, and a pressure in the chest that made it hard to breathe. One climber even wrote that he felt watched the entire time, like eyes were buried in the mountain. The post had barely any views, but now it read like a warning. Meanwhile, a wildlife biologist named Clara Monroe had taken an interest in the eagle's nest where the backpack was found. She had been tracking the mating pair that lived in that area for over 6 years. Eagles were creatures of habit. They returned to the same nesting site year after year. But something had changed recently. Clara noted that one of the birds had started scavenging more aggressively, picking up scraps and even strange human objects, which wasn't common for their kind. That's what led to the backpack ending up in the nest. But what disturbed her wasn't the behavior, was the timing. That scavenging pattern started almost exactly 11 months ago, the same week Josh vanished. It opened up more questions than answers. Had Josh fallen somewhere, injured, and the eagle found him? Had he tried to climb out of a ravine, only to leave gear behind? Or worse, was something or someone else involved, and the eagle had only stumbled onto the aftermath? These questions haunted the small group now working behind the scenes. No one wanted to alarm the public, but internally, the tone had shifted from a search operation to a mystery investigation. Something didn't line up. The journal, the movement on the wildlife cams, the eerie stories from experienced hikers, and the location of the nest too high, too remote, and too unnatural for a pack to just end up there without help, as search teams quietly began exploring the slopes around Eagle's Spine. More strange findings trickled in. One hiker found a boot print not fresh, but preserved in a shaded patch of snow near a cave opening. It was a single print, others around it. The size matched Josh's. Near the same area, a rusted multi-tool was found half buried in moss. It had Josh's initials carved into the handle. But what chilled the team was how far that location was from his original planned route. Almost 6 miles off course, with no clear reason why he would have gone that way. The terrain between his last known location and that point was brutal, rarely traveled and dotted with cliffs and drop-offs. It was the kind of place you only ended up in if you were running from something or chasing something. Deeper into the woods, Emily was granted permission to hike with a ranger escort to the area where the boot print was found. She stood at the cave entrance, staring into the darkness beyond. It smelled like damp stone and something else she couldn't quite place, an old, earthy scent, as if the ground itself hadn't been disturbed in decades. The trees here stood taller and closer together. The light barely made it through. And, while there is no official trail, there were marking small rock piles, stacked deliberately. Not by weather and not by chance. Someone had arranged them, but who? She asked the rangers if anyone else had been reported missing in this area. That's when they told her something that hadn't been made public. Josh wasn't the only one. Over the past 15 years, at least 3 other hikers had gone missing in nearly identical conditions, solo travelers. Drawn to the same region, all vanishing without a trace. In each case, the weather had turned unexpectedly. Their phones last, pinged in similar areas. No bodies ever recovered. No gear, no clear trail, and until now, no answers. But their names had been quietly linked together in internal reports part of an informal pattern spotted by longtime park employees who didn't want to cause panic. Emily single quotes as heart sank. What had Josh found? What had he walked into? That night, as the winds picked up and clouds gathered over the peaks, Ranger Hartley reviewed the latest footage from the wildlife cameras again. In one frame, something caught his attention. A figure barely visible near the edge of the frame. It was humanoid in shape, but blurred by motion, too tall to be a child, too slim to be a bear. Just a brief glimpse before the screen went black. The time stamp was 2 nights ago. The location, less than half a mile from the cave. The team didn't tell the public. Not yet, but something was stirring in the Tetons again. The kind of quiet that isn't peaceful but waiting. The mystery of Josh Keller was no longer just a search for a missing hiker. It had become something deeper, something older. And with each new clue, the question shifted from where he had gone to why this place had chosen not to let him go. And now, the mountain was whispering again. The only question was who would listen. That week, as the investigation stretched deeper into the northern edges of the Tetons, the weather turned strangely warm for early April. Snow began melting faster than expected, revealing patches of land that had been hidden for months. It gave the rangers new areas to search, but it also uncovered things they weren't prepared for: fragments of fabric, strange scratches along tree trunks, and in one case, a circle of charred stone, like a makeshift fire pit, set deep in the woods where no trail led. The stones were still blackened. Whatever had burned there hadn't happened long ago. Emily stayed close to the investigation now. She wasn't just a grieving sister anymore. She'd become part of the story. Locals began to recognize her at diners and gas stations, offering quiet words, shared glances, and occasionally hushed warnings. One older man, a retired guide who had worked the Tetons in the 80s, told her over coffee, "Some places in these mountains don't like being disturbed. They wait. They remember." She didn't know what he meant exactly, but the seriousness in his voice stuck with her. She was starting to feel it too. There was a weight in the air. Something about this stretch of land felt different, like it didn't want to be known. Meanwhile, Ranger Hartley focused on reviewing older cases, again digging through dusty archives, old reports, and maps with red-circled markings. The more he read, the more a pattern began to form. People who vanished in that same area often shared similar traits. Most were solo travelers. Many were experienced, and almost all had reported strange sensations before disappearing: nausea, confusion, feeling watched, even dreams that didn't make sense. One journal entry from a hiker in 1994 read, "Nightmares don't feel like dreams here. They feel like memory." That hiker's body was never found either. Hartley wasn't one for ghost stories, but he couldn't ignore the fact that too many accounts were echoing each other across decades. Something had to tie them together. Then there was Clara Monroe, the wildlife biologist, who started noticing strange disruptions in the natural patterns. Certain species, elk, foxes, even hawks, had been avoiding a large section near the ridge. She found trails that used to be busy with animal movement, now completely quiet. No scat, no prints, not even signs of deer passing through. It was as if a part of the mountain had gone still. Clara set up extra motion sensor cameras in the area and began tracking how animals were behaving around the supposed dead zone. The data confirmed her instincts. Wildlife was actively steering clear of that space. And nature didn't avoid places without a reason, across the state line in Idaho. A freelance investigative journalist named Adam Reyes caught wind of the story. He'd covered disappearances before, mostly cold cases and wilderness mysteries. When he saw the Keller name pop back up in regional headlines, He packed his gear and headed for Wyoming. Adam wasn't welcomed with open arms. Locals didn't. Trust media and the park rangers weren't thrilled about someone poking around. But he had a way of finding things others missed. He interviewed a few past hikers, searched public databases, and even tracked down an old friend of Josh's who revealed something Emily didn't know before the hike. Josh had been researching folklore tied to the Tetons, old stories passed down from indigenous tribes. Tales about the silent watchers of the mountain. Emily confronted Adam when she found out he was recording interviews near the ranger station. She wasn't interested in turning her brother's disappearance into a viral mystery or trending video. But Adam showed her something that made her pause. It's a symbol etched into a boulder near the hidden ridge. It matched a sketch in Josh's journal, a symbol he'd written next to the words, "Saw it again. Why does it feel familiar?" Adam said it looked like a variation of a protection mark one used by native tribes to warn or seal off certain areas. If that was true, then Josh hadn't just been hiking for views. He'd been looking for something ancient, maybe even something he didn't fully understand. More and more pieces started coming together, but none of them made the full picture. It was like a puzzle with all the edges burned off unreliable. Shifting. Rangers began finding cairns, small stacks of stones placed precisely along narrow game trails that weren't on maps. Some were old, covered in lichen and moss. Others were disturbingly fresh. Emily found one near the edge of a cliff. And beside it, half buried in the dirt, was another piece of Josh's hand, writing ripped from a journal, folded tightly. The note simply read, "If I don't come back, this place is not empty. Tell them." That message rattled everyone involved. It confirmed that Josh had felt something, seen something, that changed the way he understood the forest around him. And yet, he hadn't run. He'd stayed. Maybe to document it. Maybe to prove something to himself. Maybe he thought he could get out before it got too close. Whatever it was, he hadn't escaped it. And now, no one could say for sure what he meant by not empty, with so many strange signs pointing toward the same hidden section of the Tetons. A small team was organized to explore a deeper part of the divide, farther than any prior search had gone. Emily insisted on going with them. She felt drawn to that place now, not by choice, but by something she couldn't explain. As they climbed higher, the air grew unnaturally still. Wind that had swept through the trees just hours earlier vanished completely. Birds went silent. The sky darkened without storm clouds. It wasn't weather. It was presence. Everyone on the team felt it like walking into a room where something unseen was holding its breath. They didn't speak much during the hike. Words felt too loud. They marked trees as they passed, logged coordinates, and kept an eye out for anything resembling old shelters or signs of life. Near the top, they came across a clearing flat, eerie and perfectly circular. In the center stood a single, smooth stone. And on that stone, something carved deep and sharp, but faded by time. Emily moved closer. Her flashlight caught the grooves, and a chill ran down her spine. The symbol, the same one from Josh's journal, the same one etched into the rock photo Adam had shown her. She reached out to touch it, but Hartley gently pulled her hand back. "Not yet," he whispered. "Let's not wake anything." The team decided to camp just below the clearing, unwilling to hike down in the dark. As night settled over the mountain, the fire crackled low, and tension thickened in the air. Somewhere in the distance, a low hum began to echo steady, almost mechanical, but coming from no machine. Emily sat with the journal in her lap, staring at her brother's last entry. She wondered if he'd sat here too, hearing the same sound, waiting for something he couldn't explain. Whatever had taken Josh from this mountain, whatever had drawn him off trail and deeper into the unknown, wasn't finished yet. And now that the silence had been broken, something was stirring again. The Tetons weren't done with this story. Not yet. The wind returned around midnight, but it didn't feel natural. It was sharp, cutting through the trees in sudden bursts, then stopping without warning. The fire had burned low, flickering unevenly as the team sat in tense silence. Emily sat, wrapped in her jacket, staring into the woods beyond the tent line, her brother's journal pressed against her chest. She couldn't sleep. None of them could. Something felt close to close. It wasn't just nerves. It was that gut-deep kind of stillness, like the woods were holding something back, waiting for them to lower their guard. Ranger Hartley had gone to check one of the perimeter motion sensors set earlier. When he came back, his expression had changed. "Something passed by," he whispered, just loud enough for Emily to hear. Big, two-legged, moved fast. They checked the footage on a portable monitor. The camera had caught just a few seconds branches, shifting, a figure darting past in the dark. The shape was thin, upright, but almost distorted. It was too fast to be a person hiking, too upright to be a bear, and yet it was there, right on the edge of their camp. No one said it, but the same thought lingered between them all. If that thing had wanted to come closer, it easily could. Single quotes, V in the morning. Frost covered the tents, even though the air wasn't cold enough for it. Tracks par shallow. Unfamiliar peered a few yards outside camp. Emily noticed that one of the journal pages had been flipped during the night. It was subtle, but she was sure she hadn't left it that way. The symbol, the one carved into the rock, was now visible again. She didn't mention it right away. She didn't want the others to think she was imagining things. But deep down, she felt it was a message or maybe a warning. They broke camp early and began moving toward the cave system Adam had mapped out from historical records. According to notes from a long-forgotten geological survey, there were narrow passageways carved into the cliffside that hadn't been accessed in decades. Locals spoke of them only vaguely, places where light didn't reach and sound didn't carry. The deeper they hiked, the more the forest changed. Trees grew tighter together, taller, almost unnaturally so. The birds, the usual chipmunks and squirrels, they were gone. The air was heavy with silence, broken only by the crunch of boots on frozen soil and the occasional snap of a distant branch. Clara lagged behind briefly to check for animal signs. She called ahead a minute later, her voice trembling. "You need to see this." The group circled back. Nestled in the brush, hidden under layers of fallen pine needles, were bones. Small ones, not human, but they'd been arranged deliberately, almost ritualistically, in a circular pattern around another carved symbol, pressed into the dirt, barely visible. It was the same one again. Hartley took photos, marked coordinates, but no one spoke. The discovery didn't just unsettle them, it changed the atmosphere. Whatever this thing was, this presence, it had left a mark. Not just on Josh, but on the land itself, as the sun climbed. They reached the base of the cliff where the old caves were said to be. The mouth of one lay hidden behind dense brush and sharp rock. You wouldn't notice it unless you were looking. Emily felt her heart pounding as they cleared the entrance. The temperature dropped suddenly as they stepped inside. Flashlights, sweeping across damp walls and twisted shadows. The cave opened into a chamber, then narrowed again. On the walls were more symbols, some old, faded, others disturbingly fresh. One was drawn in charcoal, another etched with something sharp. And then Emily's light caught something on the wall that stopped her in place. A name, carved in sloppy, shaking lines. Josh. She moved closer, running her fingers over it. Beneath it, another phrase. Still here. The letters were rushed, uneven, like they'd been scratched in with the last of someone's strength. The room felt colder now. It's not physically, but in its presence, like whatever had been here, still was. Adam took slow steps toward the far end of the chamber where the wall curved inward. He paused, listening, then turned back. "Do you hear that?" It was faint. Like a high, more a low vibration just beneath hearing range. Everyone froze. Flashlights flickered briefly. One even went out. Then came a sound sharp, dragging from somewhere deeper inside. They should have left. Every instinct told them to. But they were too close now, too far in. Hartley moved forward, voice steady but low. "Keep moving. Stay close. Don't talk, unless necessary." The tunnel narrowed, forcing them to move single file. The light ahead seemed to vanish altogether. Somewhere ahead, water dripped in slow, rhythmic taps. The deeper they went, the more the passage twisted, like it had been, carved not by nature, but by intention. The walls closed in, marked by claw-like scrapes, not deep, but old. And then, at a bend in the passage, they found something that stopped them all. A pile of belongings. Torn gear, old shoes, rusted metal pieces, all from different time periods. A few items matched photos from old missing persons reports. And among them, a torn scrap of jacket with a faded patch. Emily's hand trembled as she picked it up. It was Josh's, there was no doubt. She knelt down slowly. Next to the fabric was a broken compass. Its needles spun in circles, never settling. No one could explain that. From deeper in the tunnel, the humming grew louder. It wasn't mechanical. It wasn't wind. It almost sounded like voices layered together, whispers looping over each other, too fast to understand, too soft to make out. And then, for the briefest second, it stopped. In that silence, something heavy shifted in the dark. A scraping sound. Closer this time, deliberate, not an echo, not their imagination. Clara whispered, "We shouldn't be here." Her voice cracked. Hartley nodded. "Back out. Now." They began to retreat, slowly, flashlights sweeping every shadow. But before they reached the chamber again, something passed across the far end of the tunnel behind them. Just a blur. Quiet. Too tall. No footsteps. Just movement and, then gone. Emily turned to look, catching only the tail end of motion before it vanished again. Her legs locked. Her breath caught in her throat. For the first time since they'd started this journey, she felt true fear, not grief. Not uncertainty, but raw fear. Not just for what might have happened to her brother, but for what might still be watching her now, just out of sight. They broke the surface an hour later, light, blinding, and harsh compared to the tunnel's depths. The group stood in silence. At the cliff's edge, lungs heaving, eyes scanning the woods. The forest hadn't changed, but they had. Each of them had felt it now, seen something they couldn't explain. And deep inside, none of them believed they'd been alone in that cave. Emily clutched the torn piece of her brother's jacket. "He was here," she whispered. "He was trying to tell us something. But what that message wasn't, what else? Might still be inside that mountain wasn't clear yet." And the sun was already beginning to set again. The air at the cliff's edge was thin, but Emily barely noticed. She kept her eyes on the trail behind them, half expecting to see something emerge from the cave entrance. But nothing came. Only the slow rustle of trees in the breeze, and the occasional bird call, now eerily out of place. Hartley radioed back to the station for backup. They needed to report the symbols, the bones, and most of all, the discovery of Josh's gear deep inside a place that hadn't seen human footsteps in years. But before they could make it back to the lower camp, Clara noticed something in the dirty another set of tracks. These weren't theirs. They hadn't been there when they arrived, and they weren't fresh enough to be new. The prints were odd, half-formed, but undeniably human. Barefoot, deep impressions scattered along the ridge. Some appeared to double back, as if someone had paced that area for hours. Maybe days. Emily crouched next to one of the prints, her hand hovering over the soil. She didn't say anything, but inside, something was shifting. A memory clicked. Josh had once told her he wanted to try barefoot hiking to feel more connected to the earth. She thought he was joking, but now, here it was. It's a possible sign. Another detail pointing to the impossible, that maybe he hadn't died here. Maybe he had survived, at least for a while. But why hadn't he come back? Why leave only fragments behind? Adam, who had stayed mostly quiet since the cave, now pulled out a folded map and flattened it against a rock. "These symbols," he said, pointing to the carvings they had photographed. "I saw similar ones in a museum archive back in Salt Lake. They're not tribal. At least, not in the way most people think. They were tied to early mountain surveyors guys who came here before the parks were even official. A few of them went missing too. The old logs called it the blind zone, not just a spot where people disappeared, but a place where time didn't act right." The group went silent again. Emily stared at him. "What do you mean by that?" He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I mean, the compasses don't work, batteries drain, people lose hours without realizing it. There's something geological, maybe magnetic, maybe something else entirely. But the few who came back from this side of the mountain, they didn't come back the same. One guy refused to speak after. Another claimed he saw shadows that followed him for weeks. His voice lowered, and one said he saw himself watching from the trees." Clara looked skeptical, but she didn't laugh. No one did. The events of the last 24 hours had loosened their grip on reason. Emily stood, brushing dirt from her knees. "Then what if Josh didn't vanish?" She said quietly. "What if he got caught in that?" Just as she said it, Hartley's radio crackled again. But the voice that came through wasn't from the station. It was distorted, low, broken. A static-filled whisper that sent a chill across the group. "Tell them not to follow." Then silence. Hartley froze. He checked the frequency. It hadn't changed. It was still locked on the park's emergency channel. "Could have been interference," he said. But his voice lacked conviction. Clara stepped away from the group, trying to regain a signal on her satellite tracker, but it kept cutting out. The devices were dying again, just like before they entered the cave. Adam checked his watch. It had stopped. They all looked at their gear. Electronics were failing, one by one, without warning. Like the mountain was stripping away every tether they had to the outside world. Then came the second twist quiet. Almost too quiet to register at first. Emily, lagging behind as they moved back down the ridge, spotted something tucked between two jagged rocks. Oh, a piece of blue tarp. She climbed up and yanked it free, revealing a partial lean-to structure weather-worn, hidden from view unless you were standing almost directly above it. Inside was a mess of old supplies, torn blankets, empty cans, and scrawled notes written on the backs of map pieces. Josh's handwriting again. Dozens of entries, chaotic and repetitive. Most unreadable, but a few clear enough to understand. One said, "Day 18. Time loops. I moved west, but returned here. Same morning, same sky." Another, "Don't trust the reflections. They lie." And the final one, "It's not death here. It's erasure. I'm not lost, I'm unstuck." Hartley leaned over and read the words twice. "This is way beyond a missing person case," he muttered. "This is something else." He looked at Emily, then Adam. "We might be looking at a phenomenon that rewrites how we think about this land." The sun was already dipping low behind the trees, casting long shadows that seemed to bend slightly in the wrong direction. And somewhere deeper in the woods, a sound rose again. That low, humming vibration, stronger now, Closer. Not an echo. Not the wind. It vibrated through the ground, the kind that you felt more in your bones than your ears. Emily held her brother's pages tightly. She didn't want to leave, not yet. He'd lived out here. He had survived. He'd found something. And he tried to leave a message. But the message wasn't complete. Not yet, as they began packing what they could carry. Adam noticed something else. A second Leonto, mostly collapsed, just 30 feet away from the first. He stepped inside cautiously, and there, scratched into the wooden slat with something sharp, was a date. Recent, just weeks ago. Emily stepped in behind him, gasping as she read it. March 11th. I saw her. She was close. I wanted to call her name, but the forest wouldn't let me. Josh's name wasn't on it, but it didn't need to be. Now the question wasn't just what had happened to Josh Keller. It was, is he still here? And worse was something making sure he could never leave. The trees swayed in the evening wind, casting twisting shadows across the rocks. The humming sound grew louder, and then it stopped. Not slowly, not fading out. It just cut off like something holding its breath again. They were no longer alone, and the mountain was listening. The forest stood deathly still as night dropped fast, casting the ridge into deep shadow. The lean-tos were real, the notes were real, and every shred of logic left in the group was unraveling. Emily gripped the last message again, reading it. Over and over, I saw her. She was close. Her voice cracked. He saw me. She looked at Hartley, searching for some rational answer, but none came. Adam paced back and forth, trying to pull together what they'd learned. Josh had survived. Maybe not the full 11 months, but long enough to leave behind signs, messages, memories etched into the rocks and paper scraps. The strange symbols, the distorted time, the compass needles spinning. It all pointed to something deeper than isolation or wilderness. Something was distorting reality out here. The humming returned. Only this time, it wasn't distant. It was coming from below them. Hartley spun toward the edge of the Leonto and stared down the slope. That's coming from inside the ground, he said. Clara dropped to her knees, placing her hand on the dirt. It vibrated faintly, like something stirring underneath. Then the vibration surged strong enough to rattle loose stones. A gust of wind roared up the ridge, but the trees didn't sway. Not even a leaf moved. The wind wasn't real. Emily took off down the hill without thinking. Something pulled her. She didn't understand what it was, only that she had to follow. It hardly shouted after her, but she didn't stop. The others chased her, their boots pounding the soft ground until they reached a break in the brush. There, half concealed by roots and fallen logs, was a sinkhole. Deep, narrow, breathing. Cold air up from the earth. Inside it, faintly illuminated by the weak beam of Clara's flashlight, was a worn rope, line-frayed, weathered, but still intact. And at the bottom, just barely visible, was movement. Hartley scrambled down without hesitation, rope clipped too. His gear, Emily followed, her voice cracking as she called into the dark. Josh, is that you? The answer didn't come immediately, but then something shifted in the air, a voice. Faint, broken, carried by the cold draft rising through the shaft. Don't come down. Hartley froze mid-descent, but Emily kept going, gripping the rope with trembling hands. Her heart was hammering. It's him, she said. He's alive. At the base of the hole, surrounded by sharp rocks and thick roots, lay a figure. Thin, dirty, pale. Eyes wide and blinking fast, as if they hadn't seen light in a very long time. It was Josh. He looked up at Emily with tears already forming. You made it, he whispered. You broke through. She dropped to her knees, wrapping her arms around him. He winced. His skin was raw, his frame thinner than she'd ever seen. But he was breathing, alive. How long have you been down here? she asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked past her, toward the shaft's dark edges. "Time doesn't work right here," he said. "It folds. You think it's been a week, and then it's still the same day. Or you see yourself leaving, but you're still stuck." His voice cracked. "I tried everything to get out, but it wouldn't let me. Not until now." Hartley radioed up, confirming the find. Adam and Clara stood stunned at the edge, disbelief on their faces. Josh Keller, the hiker who had vanished without a trace 11 months ago, had survived in a place no one had thought to search. He hadn't been missing. He'd been trapped somewhere, caught between time, terrain, and something more. As they pulled Josh out with care, helping him to the surface, the forest responded. The wind stopped. The vibrations ended. The silence deepened, not peaceful, but final. It was like the mountain had given him back. They carried him to the clearing just as dawn broke over the ridge. The sky was painted gold and blue, a quiet reminder of the world still waiting. Josh lay back against a pack, eyes closed, tears running down his face. "I thought I'd be forgotten," he whispered. "I thought it wanted me to disappear." Emily sat beside him, holding his hand tight. "You're not gone. You're here. And we're taking you home." But just as relief began to settle in, just as it seemed the nightmare had ended, Adam pulled Emily aside. "There's something else," he said, voice low. "When we searched the second lean-to, I took a photo of the writing, ran it through a filter to clean up the scratch marks. There's another line below the message." He showed her the image on his camera. The original note said, "I saw her. She was close." But underneath it, faintly etched beneath the surface, were 6 more words. "But I wasn't the only one." Emily's face went pale. She looked over at Josh, who was now drifting to sleep. But something in the way his fingers clenched the dirt told her he wasn't resting. He was listening. Maybe even afraid. And deep in the woods, just past the Leonto, a stone symbol that had been half buried in moss began to pulse with faint warmth. Unseen, unnoticed on the mountain, had given something back. But it had kept something too. The rescue helicopter hovered just above the clearing as sunlight streamed through the trees, scattering golden light across the ridge. Josh was wrapped in a thermal blanket, his fragile body lifted gently onto the stretcher. His eyes fluttered, open now and then, adjusting slowly to the brightness after so long underground. Emily stayed close, holding his hand while medics worked, her thoughts still spinning. They had found him. After nearly a year, the boy who vanished on Grand Teton was alive. But even now, with the rotors spinning and the team preparing for liftoff, nothing felt truly over. Back at the ranger station, news spread fast. Local search and rescue crews who had scoured that mountain the year before returned, trying to understand how they had missed that spot. Josh was taken straight to the medical center in Jackson Hole, and for the next few days, questions poured in. The media, the experts, even his own family wanted answers. But Josh barely spoke. Not because he was hiding anything, but because there were no words that could make sense of what he had experienced. The timeline didn't add up, according to his vital signs, hydration levels, and even his physical state. Doctors estimated he had only been without food or proper care for a few weeks, not nearly a full 11 months. Investigators reviewed every note, every location marked on the map, every stone carving they had photographed. Clara uploaded the symbol to an anthropology forum, and within hours a researcher replied. It matched a pre-Columbian design, something ceremonial, tied to ancient beliefs about between worlds or invisible crossings. But there were no documented signs of such symbols existing in the Teton region. None that had ever been officially recorded. Adam kept reviewing the photos of the lean-tos and maps. He became obsessed with the idea that the mountain itself had a pattern, a shift in geography that made compasses spin and GPS fail. He even brought in satellite overlays, trying to line up the days Josh had disappeared with unusual weather patterns, seismic shifts, or solar activity. The more he looked, the more he began to see that this wasn't just about survival. Something had happened that didn't fit natural law. Josh began opening up slowly, one conversation at a time. He remembered climbing up the west side of the peak and falling into a ravine. But after that, his memory bent. He said it felt like time looped. He'd wake up in the same place he fell asleep, even though he remembered moving. He saw shadows that didn't match sunlight. At one point, he followed what he thought was a rescue team, but when he got closer, the voices faded and the people vanished. He remembered finding the Liantus, but swore he never built them. Someone else had, someone who knew he was there. The most chilling thing, Josh said, came during one of the final interviews, just before the family left the hospital to return home. He looked directly at Emily, voice clear, eyes sharp for the first time. There was something else in there, watching me. I didn't see it, but I felt it. Every time I tried to leave, it pulled me back. Not physically, just mentally. Like a dream you can't wake up from. Emily didn't say much in response. She just nodded, because she had felt it too. That last night on the ridge, before they found him, the air had changed. It was quiet, yes, but not peaceful. The mountain had been holding something. Weeks passed, and things began to settle. Josh regained strength, gaining weight, starting therapy, slowly adjusting to life again. His story spread across outdoor forums, news outlets, YouTube channels, even podcasts. People speculated everything from hidden caves to time slips to secret experiments. But the core remained the same. A young hiker had vanished on Grand Teton, and against all odds, he returned from a place no map could trace. Hartley submitted his final report, noting the unusual terrain anomalies and recommending future search. Protocols to include checks for subsurface hollows and irregular magnetic fields. Clara returned to her graduate program with a new thesis on ancient symbols and their forgotten meanings in North American geography. And Adam? He took a break. He said he needed time to think, to look at mountains differently. Maybe even stay away from them for a while. Emily visited Josh often. Sometimes they just sat in silence. Other times they spoke about the future, not the past. What mattered most was that he was home. But even in peace, there were still questions. Like the hidden message under the note, but I wasn't the only one. When she brought it up to him, he didn't deny writing it. He just looked away. There were other voices, he finally said. I thought I imagined them, but now I'm not sure. Sometimes I think someone else is still out there. The Grand Teton National Park reopened the western trails after a temporary closure for investigation. Nothing else was found. No other signs, no footprints, no bones, no gear. Just that same symbol carved into a boulder, moss growing over it again. Hikers passed it daily, unaware of what it had once marked. In the end, Josh's return wasn't just a rescue, it was a reminder. Nature doesn't always follow our rules. The wilderness, vast and ancient, still holds secrets we may never fully understand. For all our maps and GPS devices, there are places in this world that remain untamed, unpredictable. Grand Teton had swallowed a life whole and given it back. But not unchanged. The story faded from the headlines, but it never really disappeared. It became something passed along in quiet voices around campfires, in trail guide warnings, in late-night Reddit threads full of mystery and awe. A legend grounded in reality, yet laced with something more. And, for Emily, every time she looked up at the ridgeline, she thought about that final night. The humming, the symbols, the silence. The way Josh held her hand tighter just before the helicopter took off, like he was scared it might pull him back again. Maybe it would have, if they hadn't gotten there in time. She chose to believe they interrupted something, that whatever was watching had lost its hold. But part of her knew deep down that they had only scratched the surface. The wilderness had let them take Josh, but it hadn't let go of its secret, and maybe it never would.